Hi, I'm Natalie the Nerd, and you're listening to the PIXELPIE podcast.
And hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. You are listening to the PIXELPIE podcast. My name is Scott, and if this is your first time here, thank you so much for joining us. You're going to have a pretty good time, I think. Generally, I sit down and I listen and chat with someone who is in the retro gaming, most likely in the Game Boy kind of niche of retro gaming, because that's sort of where my heart is these days. And if you're a return listener, welcome back. You know what to expect. Before I go on, I'm just going to mention my affiliate, retrogamestore.com.au. Craig there is a proponent of everything retro gaming. I've bought my Mega Drive video cables. I bought a bunch of like shells and screens and buttons and whatever I need for a Game Boy. He looks after Nintendo. He's got stuff there for the Wii, stuff for the PlayStation. So yeah, if you need anything, probably if you're in Australia or New Zealand, retrogamestore.com.au, there is a code that Craig's put up for us, PIXELPIE podcast. Oh, sorry, just PIXELPIE. And that'll get you 10% off your order if you just enter that in at the end. So without further ado, let's get chatting. And tonight we are chatting with Natalie the Nerd. Nat, how you doing, mate?
Hi, how are you?
Good. It's really great to catch up with you. We've actually spoken before, haven't we, when I kind of was kicking this idea around with you and Craig, and it's sort of like tried to coax you in a bit. So it's really great to hear from you again.
Yeah.
Yep. So Nat, tell us a little bit about, before we get into the Game Boy stuff, tell us a little bit about yourself and what gets you going and gets you at the solder bench each day.
Well, pretty much, I've noticed with a lot of other people when I ask them as well, what started them off in modding is ever since I was little, I just had to know what was inside anything. So this led to me pulling apart all my toys,
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
And whenever I pulled it apart, the boards, the PCBs were a big part of me. Like I used to just stare at them thinking, what are all these little things? And yeah, so there's that. I've always been into gaming. My first console was Nintendo 64 when I was little.
Right.
And yeah, that just progressed and progressed. And then as an adult, I decided, you know what, I'm going to teach myself how to solder.
Good stuff.
So I can fix things.
So was that just like through like YouTube, or did you just sort of buy an iron and some stuff and just start sort of stabbing away?
Well, it started with Raspberry Pi actually.
Right.
And I was a bit scared to start soldering, to be honest.
Yep.
But I had to solder a battery, a 5-volt step up. So that was my first thing I ever soldered.
Oh wow. Okay. What was this in our Pi? What were you doing with the Pi?
Well, yeah, the first thing that started me off was the pseudo mod and Wormy. He had a Game Boy Zero,
Right.
which was putting the Raspberry Pi Zero in a DMG shell.
Yeah, that was the Pi Zero is like the sort of smaller version, isn't it?
Yeah, and this was before the Zero W was out, so it had no internet on it or anything.
Right. Yeah, no Wi-Fi and all that sort of stuff. So how would you get like? Did it have an SD card port?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Had an SD.
Okay, so you could still get everything on there, but there's a lot of work done just straight onto the board.
Yeah.
Right. And so from N64, you moved up through consoles, and were you sort of like primarily like a Nintendo girl, or did you sort of get a whole bunch of random stuff?
Well, first off was the 64, which I was very young because I'm 25.
Right.
So born in 95. And the Game Boy Color was my first handheld.
Right. You've still got that color, haven't you?
Yeah, I still have it. I always say if there's a fire, that's the first thing I'm taking.
Cool, cool.
So yeah, I personally handhelds are my favorite. I had a SP as well. I remember begging for that for like years for an
Yeah,
SP,
yeah,
and I finally saved up to get one myself. And then, I mean, I had a PlayStation 2, but like I said, I'm more into the handheld. So
yeah.
then from that, I progressed through the DS line. So I've pretty much had every handheld Nintendo device.
Yeah, right. Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, we were sort of chatting before. I just picked up a DS today, one of the sort of fire engine red with the white Mario on it, and it's just not in bad shape, and I'm happy to have it in the collection. It was pretty cheap, so it was going to be either really great or it was going to be trashed, and maybe a donation for a macro build. You've got a macro on your Instagram, and you and I were talking about that, and it led to some discussion about DS in general, and that being one of your kind of earlier consoles. Do you want to sort of like give us a bit of info on what you think is going to go down in the DS world and why I should buy a whole bunch of them tomorrow?
Well, the thing I like about the DS a lot is that it's cheap at the moment.
Yeah,
It's not crazy like the Game Boys have been.
yeah,
I mean, in Australia, everything's expensive.
yeah,
It's a bit ridiculous, but
yeah.
if you look around Japanese eBay, or
Right.
if you're in any other country, people tell me usually they can pick up a DS for around $10-$20, which is
Yeah,
really good because it's accessible to everyone.
yeah,
Um, and it's also pretty powerful for its age. Now, people make macros usually, which if you don't know what that is, it's pretty much they snap off the top screen
yeah,
and use it as a Game Boy Advance
yeah.
handheld.
And then Boxy Pixel do that really gorgeous, like aluminium milled top plate, and they do the resistor kits. And when you only end up with the two buttons and stuff, it's pretty rad, eh?
Yeah, that's actually something I would recommend people if they're just because I get a lot of messages all the time. Oh, I want to get into modding. What should
Yeah,
I do?
yeah,
And I would probably recommend that because the biggest thing you have to do is unscrew it and then solder a resistor.
yeah, yeah. And that's just a matter of just just sort of putting me a solder on the 2 points and then just sort of dropping it on. And yeah, is it a decent solder? I bought some resistors. Sorry, I bought some like a dehum dehiss kit for my GBA, and the caps in that were like, oh my gosh, like so tiny, like the end of a matchstick. And I didn't get either of them on. I was holding my tweezers and they just disappeared like a bar of soap sort of thing. So is that one there? Is like are the resistors more manageable?
I mean, you can use through hole resistors if you want,
Right.
but I just bought a stack of 0603 resistors, which are the tiny ones.
They'll
It's
surface mount.
probably, yeah, the surface mount ones.
Yeah.
It's probably a bit too small. You could probably go with the 805 or the step up from that. These numbers are the sizes.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
how they refer to them.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Oh well, if I guess if anybody is really keen, is like on the fence, then they can just you can give them those numbers, or they can just rewind a little bit and write them down and give it a crack. I see a lot of people do the
Yeah.
macros where they just there's like a strange kind of it looks like a teeny tiny fluorescent tube that goes in the hinge holes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of neat, but it's not wouldn't be my style, but it's certainly a good way of sort of taking that, not just having two empty hinges. Do you know what that actually is?
I'm not sure. I think that's just because the other way to do it is to cut the hinges off and
Yeah,
then putty them up, and then
that's
that's
a
a
lot
lot
of
of
work.
sanding and
Yeah.
painting work.
Yeah, yeah. You were sort of saying before about there's some stuff in the pipeline for the DS kind of out there that maybe hasn't surfaced yet. Did you want to sort of talk about some of that, or is this one of Nat's projects that's going to like storm the world?
Well, it's not really my project, but it's
Okay,
because a few months back, someone with the motherboard of the DSLI, it's a six-layered board. Now,
man, that's crazy.
it is pretty crazy because of its age as well. But
Yeah,
the original Game Boys, they're like one layer PCBs. There's not much to it, but because it's six layers, no one's been able to reverse engineer it really.
yeah,
but someone in the last couple of months, they sanded down each layer of the copper and did a
What?
scan of it. So that opens it up a lot because you can see all the traces, the vias,
Right.
where everything connects.
Yeah.
So from that, people have started making TV out connections for the
Oh,
DS
bitchin'.
Lite. So
Bitchin'.
to put it on your TV,
Yeah.
which I'm excited about because of how cheap it is. You can buy a cheap, even a broken hinged DS for like $10, and you can have a full console there that you
Mm,
can play. You can homebrew, you can
mm.
emulate, do a few things with it.
And would that just be as like a macro style setup? That wouldn't be a dual screen situation onto the TV. I mean, I've seen emulator stuff and that's fine, but in that particular TV out option, that would just be like a macro.
Well, I've actually seen. I'm not entirely sure if he came out with it himself, but Marco, he's on YouTube. He does
Yep.
a lot of videos.
Yep.
He showed off a picture-in-picture display for the DS
Ah,
Lite, and also a screen swapping mod. I'm pretty sure.
that's
So
pretty
you
cool.
can swap between the top and the bottom screen
Yeah.
on one screen,
Yeah.
which is exciting as well for macro builds as well, because you can swap screens, and you could probably even use the macro as a DS Lite emulator as well.
Right. Man, that's crazy, isn't it? I've said this before. I think most of the people I speak to are at least 10 to 15 years my junior. And I've said it before, like it astounds me how, like you said, the N64, you were teeny tiny when it came out. So the DMG is like pretty old, and you get you guys, the young and fresh and keen and time on your hands and steady hands and good eyes, and you just do these amazing things. I think one thing I saw in yours was I think you call it the DMG 103.
Yeah.
Can you please explain that to me and anybody else that doesn't know what's going on there, because it's magic.
Well, it's essentially the same thing as the macro builds, except it's in a DMG shell.
Oh, so
So
it's from a DS Lite.
yeah.
Oh,
So
this is cool.
so then with that, that means you can put an R4, which is a DS flash card,
Yep,
and you can
have one of those.
emulate
Yep.
Game Boy Advance games pretty full speed on them. A
Right.
couple of NES games for sure, homebrew, and then also of course you've got the native Game Boy Advance card at the back there.
Right. So you take a DMG shell and you you put like a DS Lite. So is it a whole separate board and everything? Because like, how do you get the cart receiver for the DS Lite into the right place to accept through the top of the DMG shell?
Well, actually, I'm not sure if he came up with the idea himself, but there's a guy. He's half Japanese, half Filipino. His
Right.
name's Hi
Yeah.
on Instagram. He's pretty popular. He's the guy that makes a lot of these builds. And when I saw that, I thought I've got to make one of those myself. So it took me a while to get good enough at soldering to make it.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, you've got to manually do it all yourself, which is desoldering the DS cart slot, desoldering the Game Boy Advance cart slot,
Mhm.
desoldering the battery port, the charge port, and you're just left with the flat, thin motherboard.
Right.
And then you wire everything individually.
So you
Now,
sort of move everything away from it and then just extend it with wiring back to it.
yeah, pretty much. And
Right.
because the cart slot is 32 pins,
Right.
it's a I mean, if you're not that confident with soldering, it's a pretty big job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where my kit came into it, where I was developing a kit. So it makes it a lot easier for people with ribbon cables and separate boards instead of having to do 32 of individual wires.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm envisaging, I'm not sure if you're watching WandaVision on Disney Plus at the moment.
No, I'm not. I'm
Oh,
not very
sorry.
good.
There's a character vision, and at some point he's been captured and pulled apart, and he's laying on a table as like torso with head and arms and legs, and it's just all wires joining everything kind of back to the middle, and that's exactly what I thought. I was like, it's just like someone's just pulled this DS apart, just kind of 32 wires here and there. And sorry, I digress. Cool. So from DS, where do you like, you sort of always got things cooking, the DMG is always there, you're messing with colors and stuff. From the DS, in your kind of journey, where do you then go to sort of, where you are now?
Well, from the DS, it's funny because I've kind of taken a step back in time and gone
Mm,
to the Game Boy Color,
mm,
which is also one of my favorite devices just because such a childhood connection to the Game Boy Color.
for sure.
And that led to my LED kits or
Mm,
boards or whatever you would call them,
mm,
which, because a lot of the, starting with the DMG 103 kit, my whole goal with that was to make things easier for people that are a bit hesitant at these things.
yeah,
So instead of with the Game Boy Color, usually to put LEDs behind the buttons, you have to cut up the shell and you have to individually wire each single light to each button,
right.
which is a pretty big job. Once again, if you're not too experienced in soldering, not just that, it's a bit clunky
Yeah,
because wires everywhere, like a spaghetti
yeah,
rat's nest kind of thing.
yeah,
So my board, it literally just place it on top of the motherboard and it
right.
lines up with every button to put the light behind it.
Holy
And then
cow.
to power it, it just has vias that I've designed so they're half. So you just need to drop a dot of solder on the 5 volt and the grounds, which connect up to the cart pin out.
Right.
So it's a two. All you pretty much have to know how to do is unscrew your Game Boy Color, and you can have lights
And,
behind every button.
and there's no modification to like an original shell. It just all fits in perfectly.
Yeah, it just works straight in.
Yeah, and obviously you would probably replace your buttons with something that's sort of translucent and it's going to allow the light to come through.
Yeah. Or
Cool.
I personally like to use the white conductive pads because
Right,
I feel like they spread the light a lot better. But yeah.
right. I'm with you. I'm with you. Um, so you're replacing the contacts. You're coming between the back of the membrane and the main the original board. Is that correct? So you're putting new contacts in the place.
No, I've actually just literally done a circle cutout. So you're still using the original contacts because it's a flex PCB, which is like thinner than
Ah,
paper.
yeah, I'm with you now. That is rad. Yeah, cool. Are you able to sort of, I don't want to give away too many trade secrets, but are you able to sort of elaborate on how one goes with, I've got this idea, I've made the whole kind of like vision on a trolley, wires everywhere concept. Now I want it to be a PCB or a flex. Who do you talk to first? And how do you kind of get that process to the point where, hey, who in the UK, US wants to buy 50 of these? Because that's a
Well,
big deal, man.
yeah. Um, First off, you've got to start to become a bit comfortable with schematics,
Yeah,
which is the circuit blueprint, pretty much what you
yeah,
would call it. It doesn't have to be anything difficult. I mean, I don't do anything difficult myself, but it's just understanding wiring and understanding how to put from the wires onto a flat like blueprint, like a house would be a blueprint.
yeah. Did you get a some software or something that kind of helped you to kind of get this down on paper, so to speak?
Yeah, there's a couple of programs to make these. I personally use a program called Eagle.
Right.
There's also, I think it's called KiCad that a lot of people seem to use.
Yeah.
But you could do a look up on YouTube. That's exactly what I've done
Yeah.
and figure out how to do it because you have to draw the schematic
Yeah.
and which is the where everything connects to, and then there's a second part which is the board itself, which you then place the components and then wire everything up. And
Yeah.
then after that, you get what's called a Gerber file, and you just send that off to a factory in China, and there's your boards.
Wow. And like that feeling of getting the package and there's your boards, like that must have been pretty cool, hey?
Well, yeah, because like I said, when I was little, I used to just stare at
Yeah.
those PCBs and thinking,
Someone
"What the
else's
hell is
boards.
this?"
Yeah.
So having my own boards, it will never stop being an amazing thing to me.
Yeah. Taking that board and then putting it in the color and then just going, holy cow, I did a thing. That's so good.
Yeah, and seeing other people like use it,
Yeah.
it will never stop being an amazing thing to me.
Yeah, cool. So is that it? I mean, is where does Natalie the nerd go with this? Because this is probably your primary project as far as I can tell. Every time I see someone's like, love it, Nat, love it, love it, Nat, love it, Nat. Like, what else is going on with Natalie the nerd?
Well, the LED kits are going to be expanded to every device eventually.
Every device.
Yeah, I've already got the pocket one. I just have to send it off to get made.
Oh
I've got
wow.
a DMG one, but I've got to muck around a bit with the DMG one because the power is a bit different, seems to be. Not as much current running through it.
Right, right. Okay. Um, and what are you going to go as far as like the Switch?
The goal is Joy Cons, actually.
Right.
So
Well, I
if
don't
I
think there's any
could,
buttons on the screen, so yeah, you're a little restricted, but yeah, cool.
because yeah, that's the goal with the LEDs. Well, and also the goal is as well to expand on them to have like a turn off switch for them, so you can
Oh,
turn
right.
the lights on and off. But I want to keep it as simple as I can, just because the more chips you add to it, the more power hungry it is.
Yeah, of course.
And funny playing screens are already quite power hungry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you start throwing in like flash carts and amps and things like that. And these poor little things are like pedaling so hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Um, Now, you and I were talking before about. I was talking to you about how my daughter's 9, and the last 9 years we've been to 6 countries because it's really great to travel with kids. One of those countries we went to was Japan a couple of years ago,
Mhm.
and you've been to Japan, and one of the first things when we caught up tonight was like, cannot wait to go back to Japan. Do you want to share a bit of your love for that?
Well, pre-pandemic, I actually went 2 years in a row.
Beautiful.
So that was kind of good. I always joke with my sister, because I go with her, that it's
Yeah.
going to be our Bali, which
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to Australians, Bali is kind of like, I don't know, America, how they go to Mexico for a quick
Yeah.
holiday, or in Europe they go to Spain or Portugal for a
Yeah.
quick holiday.
Yeah.
That's what I want Japan to be to me, for me, because the way I travel there is it's pretty cheap the
Yeah.
way
It
I
is.
usually do.
And flights are pretty
Well,
cheap. Like you can get there and back for sort of $600 at the right time of the year.
yeah, exactly. And I live when I went, I lived out of convenience stores. If you are
Yeah.
familiar with the convenience stores there,
Yeah. The Lawsons and things like that.
and Family Mart, which
Yeah.
you can get a pretty good cheap meal from there. Save the money for Game Boys instead.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. What
So
what
yeah,
else did you sort of get out of it? I mean, I saw some big Instagram. You had a few temples and things like that. There's certainly something I've explained to some friends that's like it's as close to going to another planet without actually leaving your planet. It's so similar, but it's so different. And I just felt we felt so safe. And we had a guy at a train station where we didn't know where to go, and this dude just locked his little door, and he took us for like 10 minutes, like right through the station for miles and miles and miles. And we felt so bad. You wouldn't get that in Australia. You'd get a guy be like, "Just keep going that way, mate. You can't miss it," kind of stuff. So
yeah.
it was amazing.
Yeah, I love Japan so much, the culture,
Yeah.
and or especially because for in Australia it's very not built up. Australia isn't that built up compared to other countries.
Yeah.
Like where I live in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, it's like borderline the bush,
Yeah.
which trees everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a kangaroo in my street a couple years
Yeah.
ago.
It's much like that here in Brizzy too. There's a lot of green, whereas in Tokyo, unless you went to some of the bigger parks, like where the temples were, it's just buildings, 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 buildings. Yeah.
Yeah, and all the because my favorite place with where usually stay the longest in Japan is in Tokyo. It's called Akihabara,
Yeah. Yeah. Love it.
and that's my favorite place because you go there, and if you're into games, technology, and especially manga and
Yeah.
anime,
Anime. Yeah.
it's just full of that stuff. For me, it's more the electronics because
Yeah.
that's what in the history of Akihabara, what it was. It was after World War II and stuff like that. It was a place where people went for electronics.
Yeah.
So there's still some of those old electronic stores with massive capacitors that I just love to look at.
Yeah.
And yeah, and all the gaming stuff. There's electronics everywhere on the buildings, on everything.
Yeah, yeah. We were Shibuya's a bit like that too. It's just lots of neon and sort of just busyness. And we were there one night running off to this. There's a thing called the Robot Restaurant. Don't know if you've ever done it. It's like you go
I've heard
downstairs.
of,
It's
yeah.
like a mega fire hazard, but it's like cross between like some weird LSD Disney trip and Mad Max. It's just bonkers. And we're like running through the rain, my little daughter and stuff. And it was just like for half a second, we were like in Blade Runner. It was just the craziest situation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you just sort of hang out in Tokyo, or did you sort of get out more of Japan? Because we pretty much just stayed in Tokyo. We did Osaka, but primarily Tokyo.
Yeah, I've been to Osaka and also Kyoto
Right. Yeah.
um, for a couple days. With Kyoto, I did the typical tourist stuff where they have the red torii gates that go well up the mountain,
Yeah.
all those typical stuff, the forests. And because I usually go in autumn,
Yeah.
which is when everything is just orange.
Right. What time of
And
year
then
was that?
it's November,
Right.
around November.
Yep.
And I planned it so it was peak. I can't remember the word they used because there's peak cherry blossom time,
Yep.
and then there's peak the orange tree time.
Yep.
And Kyoto is the perfect place to be for that because
Wow.
especially because I also went to near in the middle of Osaka and Kyoto. There's a place called Nara where
Right.
the deers run free and they bow to you for biscuits,
Oh,
and
really?
yeah, they
Oh my
bow
goodness.
and you hand them a biscuit.
They know what they're doing.
So yeah.
Mm. Did you did you bring much back from Tokyo? Like how many suitcases, or what was the deal? Big boxes sent
Well,
home?
the when I went the second time, my suitcase on the way was half empty pretty much. I only brought the essential sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So kilos or something.
Yeah.
But on the way back, Qantas actually put one of those stickers on there that says heavy, please lift with your back properly.
Oh
So yeah, I
goodness.
brought a lot of stuff back,
Mm. I
like Gundam stuff. But
oh, Gundam. When we went, I was right into Gundam. No one else can see, but behind me, I've still got a lot of my sort of MGs and PGs and stuff like that. I have bought so much that like my daughter had like two big bags in each hand, and I sort of shoved it all on her so that when we went past all the airplane people, they're like, oh, they're not going to tell this little girl she can't take all those robots back on the plane. So I think my wife had stacks. So I would like to return and just buy a bunch of Game Boys. It'd be a lot easier to bring them back.
yeah, with it, a little hint I have for people. I don't know if I should share my secrets, but
Yes, you sure should.
when
Just you and me. That's fine.
when you go to Japan, there's a shop called Hard Off, which is
Right.
like a second hand op shop
Yep.
thrift store.
Yeah.
Now, to get to a good one, you have to kind of go off the track a bit.
Out into the suburbs a
Whereas,
bit.
yeah, and the people say the best thing is if you can't get to it by a train, like if you have to get a train then a bus,
Yeah.
then you have more luck at getting one
Mm,
that's a bit untouched.
of course, of course. I don't know if you ever watch on YouTube. There's a couple of guys called one called Kid Shuriken or Shoryuken, the whole kind of Street Fighter move.
Yeah.
Another dude called Scruffy RGB, and they both live in Tokyo. They're Americans, and their videos are primarily them just hunting, going through hundreds of thousands of $5 Famicom cartridges and things like that. The Scruffy RGB dude a little while ago did specifically a Game Boy hunt, and I was sort of sitting looking at the prices with a currency converter, and it's kind of odd because you'd think, oh, I can get like a half decent one. It was still about $100 Australian for a basic color. And I was like, oh, even if you go over there, you're not going to save much money, but you're going to buy it from there. So it's still great.
Well, if you're selective with where you buy it from, for
Yes.
example, straight directly in Akihabara, there's a little hidden. They take advantage of the tourists pretty
Yeah.
much.
The Super Potato and places like
Super
that.
Potato,
Yeah.
I always refer to it as a museum only because you go down the street to a hard off and things are half the price that they are in the Super Potato.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, but it's awesome to go through Super Potato. They have those old CRT displays set up with
Yeah.
all the old consoles.
Yeah, amazing. It's just like pallets of Famicons and 30 Neo Geos at $1,000 each. And you're right, it's a museum. It's bonkers. So what's the plan? What do you see you sort of doing with yourself for the next, I guess, 12 months or so? Because things change so quickly now.
Well, I've got a whole list of ideas to work
All
on.
right, lay it
I've
on
got
us.
heaps.
Blow our minds, Nat.
Well, I have a whole heap of things that I want to work on. First of all is, of course, the LED kits.
Yep.
I want to get a bit more confident with the programming of the carts as well,
Yep.
because a few months back when I was just starting, Perth Retro Gaming, which a big shout out to Perth Retro Gaming.
Yep.
They've been so supportive of me and they're a great business down in Perth in Australia. So
Yep.
they actually came to me asking if I could do them a logo cart.
Yeah. Can you elaborate a
And
bit on the logo cart concept, please?
yeah, well, there was a guy, I first saw it on Game Changer Mods.
Yep.
He had a custom cart and I saw that. I'm like, oh, wow, I need to know how to make that. And then I saw a few other people had done them, like Game Duck was doing the non-colored ones. So I wanted to learn how to do it myself, colored ones, whereas nobody had made colored ones before. Everyone just made the black and white for the DMG and the pocket.
Right.
So I managed to program it, which is using the language C, the programming language C, if anyone knows anything about programming. And yeah, I managed to compile that up, logo ROMs, and then I put the test program on there so you can test the buttons when you make a new build.
Yeah. So the concept of, again, this is you being self-taught, where you must have found a little bit of tutorial on, what it takes to make the information and then burning it to a ROM to a cart. That's all self-taught as
Yeah,
well.
pretty much. I did a tiny bit of programming at university.
Yep.
It was just an intro course,
Yep.
and that was Java, which I always say I hate programming because it's
Mm.
like using another language.
Mm.
So it's a bit tricky. But so yeah, you have to, with the Game Boy Color slash normal Game Boy, it's a bit trickier because of, if you think about it, they all use the same kind of processor, which is from 1989. Now
Up
that's like
into the color.
borderline pretty much. The color just can show color, but
Right.
it's other than that, because if you think about it, you can use a Game Boy cart on a color and it looks exactly the same. It just doesn't have the color built in it.
Yeah, sure.
So that's an old processor from the late 80s. Now, if you think about technology from the late 80s, that's when computers were still the size of rooms and stuff
Mm,
like that.
mm,
So it's a bit tricky to you can't just copy over a JPEG or a PNG onto
mm,
the card.
mm,
You have to split it up into tiles,
mm-hmm,
which is how the Game Boy works. The screen is built up of tiles, and each tile has 8 by 8 pixels in it.
mm-hmm,
Now you've got to, for the picture, you've got to split it up into those tiles, and then draw it out as a map. So
mm-hmm.
the Game Boy thinks it's a map of a level. And because maps usually have repeating tiles, if you think about it like a Zelda map or a Mario map of a game,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the same thing. There's the floor tile, then there's the tile for the cloud, for
Mm-hmm.
example, but it's the
Yep.
same thing repeating.
Yeah,
That's the
sure.
little trick.
Yeah, groups of
Mm.
trees or like, the pathway is just the same tile over again.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you think about it like bricks, like
Yeah,
it's just the same brick put
yeah, yeah,
into a pattern. So that has a very limited amount of tiles it can show on the screen at once.
sure.
So there's little tricks around it, but yeah.
Okay. And was that something that you were able to kind of, again, using some software where you could sort of, you code it up and you put it into an application, and then it kind of looks like, oh, okay, well, that's not quite right. I'm going to tweak my code. Or did you have to do it, push it to a cart, put the card in every time, and then tweak it?
Well, when you compile it, it spits out a .gb file.
Right.
So
Okay.
you can just use an emulator on the PC. I use that
Right.
to check it.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome.
And then I flash it to the cart using a cart flasher.
Mm.
And because this is another thing people often ask me which one I use. It's made by Inside Gadgets, which is another Aussie company.
Yep. I
So it's
think,
pretty cool that
yeah, Jordan
yeah,
was mentioning those guys. Yeah.
they've got some pretty cool things, and they have lots of custom carts and mod stuff as well. So it's pretty cool to have a little community in Australia that makes these kind of things.
Yeah. It's crazy what happens when you turn a few stones, isn't it? Like what's around. There's, like I've mentioned before in Brizzy, there's this massive, I wouldn't even say underground. It's like an arcade scene, it's sort of there's dozens and dozens of Twin Galaxy, which take it or leave it, is still kind of like a record keeping organization for, gaming. And there's dozens and dozens of world records here in Brisbane. And it's the same. Every time I speak to someone, they're like, I get this from these people. They're in Perth. Oh, these guys from Adelaide. I'm like, holy cow, they're so rad, And I spoke to you about trying to wave the flag, but unfortunately, there's so many rad people across the world. I'm going to have to give everybody a crack at it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I actually that's one of the things I want to focus on as well, building up Australia,
Yeah.
because for so long it's been so hard to get into this hobby, deep into the hobby, because there's nothing, well, I can't say there's nothing,
Mm,
but it's hard to, for example, I needed to buy a few resistors the other day,
yeah.
whereas to buy these are the mini surface mount resistors,
Yeah.
whereas you buy them from China for like, you could buy 100 for $2.
Yeah.
In Australia, it cost me um, that same amount to only get 10.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Everything's so cost prohibitive here. It's any project you do, just like as a basic mod, like I'm just doing screens or shells. I'm very fortunate to have Craig at retrogaming.au.com.au, but yeah, you can't just sort of order this from this mob or this from that mob, because it's $20 for the shipping each time and 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, I've actually tried to start. I haven't worked on it for a while, but I started building up a website called Australia's Very Own,
Right.
which, as for short, I call it AVO, just for a fun little
Oh
Aussie thing.
yeah, we get that.
So, Australia's Very Own .card.co. Card has two R's in it, and on there, I want to list up all the Australian stores. So if someone was thinking, oh, I really need to get some stuff for my Game Boy or whatever,
Yeah.
they can go on this website, and on there so far, I've got Game Boy Custom, which is up in Gold Coast or Brisbane, I think,
Yeah, he's on
and
the Goldie.
he refurbs
Yep.
devices. Perth Retro Gaming, they refurb, resell, mod, and they also have some parts.
Yep.
Then there's me, of course, that I'm trying to focus a bit more on the electronic side of things. Like, for
Yep.
example, I just put up on my site, I'm going to sell Game Boy Color capacitor kits because you can't find them in Australia for some reason,
Right. So they would
which
just
is
be
just,
recaps, or is there a specific reason that you would do that?
yeah, it's just for if someone wants to recap, if they've got bulging capacitors or
Right.
whatever,
Yeah.
or dead fuses. I'm selling the fuses as well because I couldn't find them in Australia. So I'm selling those just $10. You get all the capacitors and I'll send it off to you just like in a regular letter.
Yeah.
And then the other store I've got on there is Yesterday's Tech,
Yeah.
which they cast buttons,
Yeah.
and I think you might be getting into shells as well.
Oh, nice. Be nice to have some Aussie made shells that you can have shipped nice and quick. That would make things very
Yeah.
different. Yeah. Yeah, cool. So what else you got cooking
I
that you can
want
tell us
to
about?
jump over to Arduino
Ooh,
if because
the dark
I mean
side.
I love Game Boys, but the cost of things is a bit
Yeah.
ridiculous to me,
Yeah.
and I want to make things as accessible as I can to anyone.
Yeah.
So anyone can pick up these things and play around with them.
Right.
And unfortunately, Game Boys aren't at that level anymore.
So would you be you'd be a follower of Marky Pie?
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually,
That's still Pi stuff, but I guess the Pi and the Arduino, they kind of fall in a similar category of that sort of microcomputer.
yeah, the Pi is like more of a full-on computer where the Arduino is a bit more simple.
Yeah. It's a
It's
bit more
a
dumb.
microcontroller, they call them.
Yeah.
And for just a spoiler, I'm actually working with Marky Pie on
Ooh.
making up a kit for an Arduino build Game Boy
Oh.
because he builds Kite Retro makes the kits.
Yeah.
Kite, if you look up Kite Retro, his boards are pretty crazy. They are to make those compute module Pi Game Boys, which the compute module is like it looks like a stick of RAM. Or if
Right.
you don't know what that is, it's how I don't know how to explain it. Pretty
So
much
like a couple
just
of
a
inches
really
long,
small,
yeah, a couple of inches long and an
yeah,
inch and nice and flat. And just sort of it's like a wafer, sort of slots into like a header board. But yeah.
yeah. And he's made Game Boys around that, so that's a fully powered Pi
Wow.
in a Game Boy. So that means Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1,
Yeah.
all those more powerful systems.
And there's so much of that stuff around now that like I bought one a few years ago. It's called the Retro Stone. And it's much like that. It was let down by the screen, but it's the same thing. It's effectively a Pi 3, in a sort of DMG size shell. And you can just go on eBay and there's a plethora of that sort of stuff, but so much of it is like 310 games in one and very limited, and you just don't know what you get. So it'd be nice to know that there's something out there that's really actually going to be what it says it is.
Yeah, and because the Pi ones, whereas they're cheap, they're not that cheap because a fully powered Pi is still, well, in Australian money, I know it's $100 to
Yeah.
get a
Yeah.
Pi 4.
Yeah.
Whereas Arduinos, you can get the chips for like $5 or so.
Wow.
So once again, that opens it up to people, which is the goal for me, to open things up to people, more accessible, and so people can muck around with these things themselves.
I've seen so many people do so much cool stuff. Like a guy I was talking to a while ago with similar to what you're talking about, but he made like a pump controller for his tank on his roof. So it just picked up on a couple of float sensors and then did this. And he's like, I didn't even know what I was doing. I had a pump and I had a tank, and I kind of read this stuff. And like within sort of 6 months, he was doing all crazy stuff with gates for his cows and timers and solar sensors and just all. He says for like $300, he automated about 4 hours of his day's work. Phenomenal. So you guys are going to
Yeah.
have so much fun.
Yeah, because there's a guy in my suburb around Christmas time. He actually has Arduino powered Christmas lights,
Oh, wicked.
which
Yeah.
you have the FM transmitter, so you connect to the radio station, and the lights flash to the music.
Oh, wicked.
Which those are cool little things because
Yeah.
as much as I love Game Boys, for me it's also as well the electronics that gets me really excited.
Yeah. And you've got to be challenged in your hobby as well a bit, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
yeah, to expand on all that other stuff too, not just Game Boys.
Mm, mm. Um, so you're leaving us then? Once you've done everything with your lights, you're just going to bugger off and leave us all behind to remember who you were, or do you think you'll still poke around in the Game Boy world?
Well, of course, I'm always going to be in the Game Boy world, but the thing is,
Thank
I
God for
want to
that.
learn more and then transfer that to the Game Boy eventually. And
Right.
just because what I like is I like things that I always call them like stupid little mods
Yeah.
that are just fun. There's
Yeah.
nothing else to it except
Yeah.
being fun,
Yeah.
which is like lights, for example.
Yeah.
So I want to make in my big dream world, I would make my own type of screen kits that are
Yeah.
more accessible, more cheaper. Like I know Ben Ven, he called his Al Cheapo the screen kits.
Yeah.
Like I would love to make things more cheap and accessible for people, cheaper flash carts, all that stuff. Like that's the dream to make
Mm.
that sort of stuff.
Yeah. The
And
flash cart guys, they're kind of printing money, aren't they? I mean, it's a big. I've got several flash carts, and you sort of go, oh, it's in Australia, it's about $300, but you're saving thousands in the long run. But it still seems like a lot of money. So yeah, do that. Nat. Get us cheap flash carts. I'll invest in that for sure.
yeah, because it's all about being accessible to everyone around the world, regardless of how much money you have
Mm,
and everything. Because I always think back to when I was younger. It's not like I lived in the gutter or anything, not
mm,
to sound
mm,
rude or anything,
mm.
but I mean, I had two sisters, so there's three of us. So I couldn't just go up to my mum and say, "Can you buy me a game?" Like
Mm,
I only had a couple games. It was limited to
mm,
only one or two things that I would get for my birthday and or Christmas.
yeah,
So a lot of where I started off things is putting custom firmware on things.
right.
Like my DS was a big one when I first bought the R4. I know I don't condone piracy,
Mhm. Yeah,
only backups and homebrew,
yeah,
but
yeah, for sure.
that was something that opened up the world for me because I mean, I didn't have when I was younger thousands of dollars to spend on like a big stack of games or anything. It's
Yeah,
to make things cheap and accessible for people
yeah,
is the big thing I want to do.
yeah, yeah. It's a funny subject, isn't it? I mean, yeah, there's no doubt that it is piracy, but it's also an element. I've spent probably the last couple of years really actually playing legitimate consoles, but prior to that was all emulation. I've got two Pi 3s. I've got one here into my CRT through a HDMI to RCA converter, and that does pretty much console stuff. And then I've got a kind of a homebrew arcade cabinet I built, two player. And it is really good to be able to kind of get a go at what what what's out there, and then you start to realize the original hardware is good. But I always kind of look at it and go, well, Nintendo, the only person I'm not giving money to is the guy that's trying to charge me $160 for a cartridge. That's clearly not worth
Exactly.
that. So you can find some other chump, buddy. I'm going to display it on my flash cart. Um,
Exactly. And it's especially because during this pandemic time, all those carts have jumped ridiculously
mm,
expensive.
mm,
And you've got to be careful because there's some
yeah,
people selling reproduction
yeah.
carts as originals. And I mean, that's a bit not, it's a not nice thing. And
Some
I
people
saw on
don't know. I'm
Instagram,
sure they've been burnt themselves without even knowing it. And now they're just trying to move it on. But yeah,
Yeah,
there's
and I saw
definitely
on
there's definitely
Insta.
people being nasty about it too. Yeah, sorry, cut you off.
Oh, I was just gonna say on Instagram, I can't remember who it was, but they bought a Game Boy Advance, I think it was, and off eBay, and they were sent like 2 bottles of water.
Oh, dirty.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
PayPal buyers protection right there. That's why I always pay the extra. I offer to pay the extra $3 or whatever because I've got water. Thanks. Mm,
exactly. So yeah, opening things up
mm,
and so people can muck around with things themselves.
mm,
Just like the USB-C, it's another thing that I'm planning on working on.
yeah,
Is converting a lot of the old devices to USB-C.
yeah,
So it's easy to charge it and you don't have to go buy a third party cable. You can just
yeah,
use your phone charger.
yeah.
Yeah.
So would that be just like, say, for example, a Game Boy Color with just like a standard sort of IKEA electronic store lithium-ion battery in the stock shell? Because that was my kind of gripe. I've got a couple of clean juices that have worked okay for me, but if you have an original shell, you've got to modify them. You've got to cut out that little separator and a bit on the edge. Would you just be talking about just putting standard rechargeable lithium-ion double A's in the console, and then you'll be charging my USB-C instead?
Well, it's more for the modded consoles, the ones that have already got rechargeable circuits in them. For example, the DS line, the
Right,
Game Boy SP, the PSP is one that I'm going to work on.
right,
Because I always say to people, because when people come to me with asking about lipos and stuff, I suggest using AA batteries. I mean, it's nice to have a lipo in an old Game Boy Color, but a lot of people don't understand that batteries actually can be very, very dangerous. Lipos can
quite,
be.
quite. Lipos specifically can be quite volatile. Yes.
I mean, if everyone remembers a few years back, the Samsung phones blowing up. I
Mm,
mean,
mm,
if you don't know what you're doing, it's a very risky thing. And I don't want to
mm.
give someone advice that sets their house on fire. So
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I always suggest to use for the old ones, just use the batteries. I personally always recommend the Lada batteries from IKEA.
Yep.
They are each the AA cells, I think 2,500 milliamps,
Yep.
which two of those is 5,000 milliamps. That's more than a phone battery, and that's going to last forever
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
a Game Boy Color. So,
Yeah.
and the lipos, one thing people don't realize is the circuitry to charge it. You shouldn't really be playing the Game Boy while it's charging.
Sure. You're
So
drawing that bit extra there because you're asking to charge and drive.
you stuff up the chemistry inside the battery like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's how they blow up.
Yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time with RC aircraft in cars, and lithium ion is a little more stable, and you can sort of let it, you can muck around with it. But lipo specifically, lithium polymers, I've seen them vent, and you need to just run away and let it do its thing, because it can be quite noxious, and yeah, it's not
Yeah,
cool.
I was making racing quadcopters a few
Yeah,
years back,
yeah,
and I
you know
remember
what I'm talking about.
Smash,
Yeah,
yeah, Smash, because those have big lipos on it, like that could really like really blow up in your face,
because
really.
when you're doing giant
Um,
size like 6S big guys,
yeah, I do usually 6S or 4S
yeah,
lipos I would muck around with. And for example, I remember once when I did a pretty big crash on my drone, a big puff of smoke came out,
yeah,
and I just stayed back
yeah,
just
yeah,
to make sure it doesn't start a fire. And I
yeah.
start the next big bushfire in Australia
Oh
on my
yeah,
quadcopter.
absolutely. Even like when I used to fly, all day, and we'd fly a bunch of stuff, and you'd always charge like on a metal surface, and I never had anything vent myself because I would always nothing would sit at low or high voltage, always storage charge, and you always balance charge and things like that. But yeah, many a time I've seen people just put up photos of their bench is just torched because they did it on a wooden bench next to all the other batteries. And yeah, it's a serious thing. I'm a bit like that with my 3D printer. I wouldn't think that it's going to burn my house down, but I would hate to lose my home, my family home, over a hobby.
Yeah.
It's
You
just
just
not
have to
worth
be
those risks. Yeah, you do. You do.
a bit smart with those things. Like, for example, with lipos, from Bunnings, which is a hardware store, I just got like a metal toolbox that I
Yep.
put the lipos in there, even
Yep.
though they're at storage
Yep.
charge,
Yep.
just in case anything goes on. You can also get the fireproof charging bags that
Yep.
you usually get when you go into an RC or quadcopter store.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
It's
if you
silly,
think
isn't it?
about yeah, because if you think about the battery chargers for the quadcopter, the 4 cell battery chargers, they're big things. And now in the Game Boy, you're putting it into this tiny little thing
Yeah.
that's only a couple dollars. And if one of the components on that fails,
Yeah.
you could really,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, we you talked a little bit about the Switch before. Like, how far do you think you can go with the controllers on the Switch? That's if a DS is a 6-layer board. I know that it's not the game in the controllers, but what do you know about them?
The another thing that's interesting with the Joy Cons is that they have a big a Joy-Con drift. I don't know if you've ever heard about
Yep.
Joy-Con drift.
Yep.
So that makes me a bit hesitant to play around with them because they're a bit delicate, it seems.
Yeah.
But the LED board should be a pretty simple mod, just a kind of place thing.
Yeah.
It's just that they're so small and there's so many little springs and screws on Joy Cons.
Right. It might be something that people might send their Joy-Cons to you and you do it for them. Do you reckon?
Or something like that, or someone, a refurb guy or girl, whatever,
Yeah.
does it.
Yeah. Or maybe you would just sell them like as a Joy-Con, like, get a bunch, get a box of broken Joy-Cons, so to speak, refurb them, and part of the refurb would be adding that lit buttons and stuff into them.
Yeah, for the Pro controller is another thing with the Switch that
Right.
you could do it to, which would be a bit more accessible to other people because that wouldn't be so much of a tear down.
Yeah, sure, sure. Do you play much? Do you have time to play? I assume you lift your head from the solder on every now and then.
Yeah, I usually these days I'm more of a PC gamer.
Right. What
I've
games are you into?
at the moment I've been obsessed for a year or so. Apex Legends, which is a battle royale game.
Bitchin'.
So
You you crushing
then
it?
of course, well, yeah, I have good days and bad days with
that's
it.
that's gaming, right?
And then, of course, the nostalgia with the old games. I always love to play a Game Boy Advance
Mm,
game because, in
mm.
my opinion, Game Boy Advance is kind of the sweet spot of retro gaming because the games are so replayable.
Yeah, definitely. And just with I wonder, like, if there's any of the original sort of GBA engineers that sort of are still around and they pick one up with like an LCD in them and just go, whoa, they might sort of go, that looks terrible because now I can see all the stuff I did wrong with my animations, or are they just like amazed at what's going on with their tech?
Yeah, pretty much. And yeah, those funny playing screens, they're beautiful to look at.
I'm waiting on a couple of the new OSD screens. I've got a pocket sitting here that can easily take one, and probably a color as well. But just the way you can change all your palettes, I've seen like a pocket, two pockets side by side. It's like the Q5 OSD rips, blah blah blah. You can move it around and change the palette, and they've got a pocket like an original pocket next to a pocket with this, and the guys tweak the palette. And honestly, we could probably tell the difference. But if I'm just sitting down, I handed that to someone, they'd be like, wow, this is in great shape. You're like, yeah, it's an LCD. Like, it is amazing, truly amazing.
Yeah, another interesting thing that's happening with the Pocket is people have been starting to put a Game Boy Color inside the Pocket
Yes,
because the Pocket is such a cool little size.
it is. And the triple
Um,
A's, it's just there's something really it is really pockety, isn't it?
yeah.
It's a silly word.
So Cypher, I think is how you would pronounce his names. He's
Yeah,
made a board, which is really interesting. If you go on Instagram, check out his board that he's made to convert the controls over so they fit the shell.
right.
And then also Marco and a few of the guys in the Game Boy Discord,
Yep.
they've gone a different way with it, which is they've cut a Game Boy Pocket in half and cut a Game Boy Color in half and spliced them together.
Right. So you
It's
mean
funny
like the
because
front and the back?
yeah, the controls from the Pocket
Right.
and then the top half of a Game Boy Color, which
Oh.
I'm planning on doing the same sort of thing with one of my colors that I've got, because if you've ever opened a color that has all the batteries have exploded in it,
Yep.
it just eats up the corrosive, all that sort of stuff just
Yep.
eats up all the copper pads. So
Yep.
it's like you've got a working Game Boy there, but you can't use the controls.
Right.
So reuse it into something else that
Yeah.
to make it work, breathe life into it in a different way.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, that sounds pretty creepy. It'll be something that'll come up, and it's amazing how people like yourself and Marco and all those other guys you mentioned will do these amazing things, and we kind of all sit back. And when I say we, I mean like me specifically, I can only speak for. I sit back and go, "Whoa, I would never do that." But 9 months down the track, I might be doing exactly the same thing because you guys are making it so achievable, and the
Yeah.
content out there to teach people how to do and perform in this hobby is and I think what I really like the most is on top of that is that you guys are so willing to share and willing to impart this knowledge onto people. There's no sort of real narky, oh, I've got this and I've got that, and I'm not telling you about it. That's a hobby and that's a community. And I always say that's what makes this place a really good place to be.
Half of my messages that I get daily, I'd say, are helping people out with things,
Yeah.
which I love to do, because the whole reason I started Instagram was a couple years back. I actually saved my domain name, Natalie the Nerd. I was starting a little blog to just write up what I was messing around with,
Yeah.
because there's a guy in the 3D printing world, another Aussie, Maker's Muse, if
Yep.
anyone's heard of
Yep.
him.
Yep.
He had a little video and he was talking about the makers. And that's what I consider myself to be, part of the maker community.
Sure.
And he was saying how part of the maker community is to share your information.
Yeah.
So, because so many times when I looked up something like, why isn't this working? I'll find someone's blog and they were messing around with the same thing I was a year ago, and they have all the information there. So
Yep.
my idea was to share whatever I'm building, what I break, what I do right. So if someone, even if just one person 5 years down the track searches how to put lights on my Game Boy, they'll find my blog and they'll be able to fix their Game Boy
Yeah.
or whatever they're messing around with. So that was the real idea of my Instagram at the start, to share things that I break so people don't have to break them themselves.
So good. Hey, it is a nice feeling when you know that someone has benefited from your tears. Um, yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I've broken so many DS lights in my time that when I help someone fix one, I always say I feel like I'm getting the karma back for
Yeah,
reviving one.
yeah, you're getting forgiveness from the DS Lite gods for all the ones you
Yeah.
killed. Good on you. Mm, um, yeah, normally I give the people that have been on the podcast opportunity to kind of highlight a few people within the community, or people that aren't yet in the community, but you think, what, this person should get a mention. So move the spotlight, away from us and onto others, because that's what the community is all about. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to, and this can be as many or as few people as you like. So yeah, let us in on the people that are either inspiring you or the ones that you think are catching on quick and we should probably look out for. And there's some people, like myself, I just collect. I'm a bit of a dimwit and I just love it. So share a few names with us.
Well, when I go through Instagram, I'm always most interested in people that are doing something different or getting more into the guts of the Game Boy.
Yeah.
And it's not just Instagram, it's also some other things on like the Discord
Yeah.
mentioned, which is connected to the Reddit if people are interested, the Game Boy Reddit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a few guys in there, for example, like HDR and Marco, that they really just do crazy things. Or Marco is good because he has his videos where he compares screens so people can know which screen
Mm,
to get instead
mm,
of making a
mm.
mistake.
And his
And
tutorials are awesome too. Like I think everything I've done has been my final like feeling of I can do this has been from a Marco video, and that's Mahko on YouTube. And I think on
yeah.
Instagram he's like Marco was taken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so good. Yeah,
Yeah, because yeah, also Retro CNC,
yeah.
which is doing the hingeless SP build.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
And I there's two. There's the Boxy Pixel and the Retro CNC one.
Oh, okay. I was not aware of that. Yeah. Okay. Go on.
Retro CNC, they work with Marco and some other people in the community to build those things up. So I feel like it's got more of a test behind it. Like it's got more of a reputation of people that I
Bit of
trust
pedigree.
behind it.
Yeah.
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 And I like the hingeless SP. It's a little bit smaller than the other one. So
Right.
it's a cute little almost like probably a pocket size thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is nice. Then also there's high 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 highs on Instagram. Everyone would knows him
Yeah.
pretty much. He does the
I'll get a
DMGs.
list of these names off you later, and I can put them in the show notes so everybody can go track them down.
Yeah. And then there's also PSP Guru, because
Right.
I know we're talking about Game Boys, but PSPs also have a decent following as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm planning on working with him to make a few little things for the PSP.
Oh, gorgeous.
So
It's it's quite a powerhouse, the PSP, isn't it? Like I do know a number of people that have everything, and they're like, but my daily carry is a PSP.
I love the Go. Wait, is it called the Go? Yeah, the one that just flips up, the old
Oh, the slidey
PSP.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a cute little pocket device. It's smaller than your phone. It's an easy thing to carry around. It's really good for emulation.
Yeah.
And then the Vita is pretty powerful,
Yeah.
which is a good little thing. It's got everything on it
Yeah.
almost that you
Yeah.
can emulate.
Yeah.
Um, Also Neo's Customs on Instagram. He
Mm-hmm.
does SP things, mods, and he's casted some buttons for the SP. He's also made his own Torx screw kit, which is Retro CNC has done that too, which is for me a bit of like a tools and hardware nerd.
Yeah. Yeah.
Torx
Yeah.
screws is a really exciting thing to me because the screws you get with the shells are so like
Yeah.
shitty
Yeah.
that when you use the wrong screwdriver, you
Oh,
strip them completely.
absolutely. Yeah.
So having Torx screws, they're a lot more powerful. They're made out of a better metal.
Yeah.
They just hold up a lot better.
Yeah. I agree. I've put a GBA that I reshelled apart like 16 times because of dust and stupid dumb amateur stuff. And by the time I got to the fourth one, I had to leave a couple of screws out. They were not going back in because I was lucky to get them back out again.
Yeah,
These
they're
the
just
original screws.
yeah, they just strip. I don't know what it is. It just
Mm,
they especially the tri wing for some reason.
yeah. So I'm not
It
just ham
just
fisted. It's a thing, right?
yeah, it's a thing. The tri wing, especially because if you're not using the right sized screw bit,
Yeah, for
which
sure.
is another the drill bit, whatever you would call it.
Yeah, that's me.
And then of course I always want to shout out the girls in the
Of
community.
course.
Just a quick little shout out to on Instagram, Fraken Boy, Joel's Gaming, Pixel Fix, Next Stop Please, and Game Boy 47s.
Ah, yes.
They're because I look at my statistics on my followers, and I mean, there's only 18% females that follow me, and that makes me a little bit sad.
Yeah.
So, to lift up the other girls in the community is always something that I want to do,
Yeah.
as well
Yeah.
as the Aussies.
Yeah, I must admit that, like, just after the first couple of episodes, I kind of looked at the the statistics are just to sort of see if anybody actually listening. And it says gender, but I mean, who knows what people are putting. And it was like only sort of, it wasn't a very significant percent. I was like, oh man, how do I get more cool chicks to kind of want to listen and listen to Nat and people like yourself and, come up with stuff and, turn some heads. So, yeah, I agree. I was a little bit sad too.
Yeah, so I'm always wanting to shout them out, especially Pixel Fix. She is, I call her the pocket queen.
Right.
She makes some really beautiful pocket builds.
Right. I do have a few.
And
I am sort of. I've got a list of people that I've got about 2 years worth of people that I would really love to give the opportunity to come on and share their story like all you guys have. And most of those names are on my list, so hopefully they'll be willing to come on and do what we're doing.
and then Game Boy Genie, he's
Right.
in the UK. Ben,
Yep.
he has started. He did this really cool thing during quarantine where he offered people they buy the parts and he'll refurb your Game Boy for you
Right.
free of charge, which was a really
Oh,
cool little
cool.
thing.
That's awesome. Yeah.
During when they went into their third lockdown or whatever it was in the UK.
Yeah. That's keeping two
And
people
then
happy.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Keep someone occupied. I mean, lockdown has been so hard on everyone, and I always am open about mental health and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
there's any little help I can give anyone in that space.
Yeah.
And then just my last little shout out would be just to a couple of the Aussies in the community, because I always like to lift up the Aussies. Custom Handhelds, he's just recently came on the scene. He's starting to cast things as well. He refurbs and sells. And then
he's actually not far from me. He's probably about 45 minutes from my house.
Yeah, up in Queensland. There seems to be
Yeah,
a
on the
few
Gold
of you
Coast.
up. Yeah. Nostec, I think he's in Queensland as well.
Right.
He posts some pretty cool pictures.
Yeah.
And then there's Taco Games and
Right.
Taco like octopus in Japanese. He's in Melbourne. He's actually not that far from me either, probably like 30 minutes or so.
Yep.
And then of course Perth Retro, which they just have everything. And then Yesterday's Tech.
Yep.
With the button casting, and then of course retrogamestore.com.au.
Yep, Craigie.
Yeah, Craig, especially if you're in Australia, he's just recently come out with some acrylic stands for Game Boys.
I'm looking at two of them, for one for a pocket and one for actually I think it's a DMG and one for a color, and they're pretty bloody good, and they are hard to get from overseas. It's his price is really great considering it's here and shipping's minimal. So if you're in Australia, they are good stands.
Especially because they're actually made in Australia as well, which
Correct.
is pretty cool.
It is very cool.
So always like to support the local stuff, especially through all the pandemic.
Yeah, Craig's inventory is just getting bigger and bigger. It's like keeps adding and adding and adding. So that's full time for him too. And I'm not sort of just plugging him because he's an affiliate. It's nothing really in it for me except for just sort of saying, there are people out there in Australia that are really trying to bring a lot of things here, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's about it. Another little shout out I'd like to give is also to Nara Makes Games.
Right.
He's actually living in Thailand at the moment, but he takes some of the most awesome little pictures of his Game Boys around Thailand.
Oh,
and that also goes to Peg City 8-bit.
Yeah.
He's in Canada. He takes photos. Actually, in my webcam, if you can see up here, I've got a canvas of one of his Game Boy pictures that he took.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. All right. Well, I'm sure there's probably a bunch more that have sort of helped you along your way and all that sort of stuff. And it just astounds me that you're just this chick that kind of went to uni and used to work at Bunnings and taught yourself how to hack things up, and now you're sending these flexes that you designed, made in China, across the world. I'm super proud of you. It's something that I think a lot of people would really love to have the courage to do, and you've just hooked in and nailed it. So awesome on you. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I sold it up about 300 boards in a week, which
Holy
was a bit
moly.
crazy.
I'm not even going to do the
So
maths.
so yeah, and those are actually gonna I sent the box off to the UK last week, and tomorrow one's going off to Canada to retro modding. So retro modding and Z Labs.
Oh,
And then
wicked.
so people can get them there a lot easier. Don't have to worry about Australia Post
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
pricing.
Yeah, yeah. And what about are you moving into Europe, the UK or
Well, with the UK Z Labs.
oh okay, my
So
mistake. Yep.
yeah.
Okay, cool. World domination begins here. Natalie the nerd.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right. Well, look, I really appreciate your time. I'm probably, as time goes on, you're gonna do this and do that. I'm gonna sort of be talking to your manager to try and get you back on again, in 9 months or whatever. So I really do appreciate your time. Um, and I just encourage anybody that knows of Nat, because, well, you do now if you're listening to this podcast, to go check out what Nat's doing and get some inspiration. And she's super friendly. Hey, Nat, super friendly. You pretty much live just to help people live out their Game Boy dreams and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, people come to me and ask if I do refurbs, and I actually push them to go and do it themselves.
Yeah.
Not because like I don't want to make it. Like I mean, I could pick up a big profit off that if I wanted to, but
Yeah.
to me, I just love making things with my hands.
Yeah.
It's like a thing that's in my family. Everyone in my family makes with their hands. It's just a thing in my blood. So I just like to encourage people to do it
Makers,
themselves.
family of makers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And look, at the end of the day, it's beyond you, but you can easily just start with a reshell, and you can buy a crappy AliExpress reshell, or you can buy from one of the mobs that we've spoken about tonight, and you buy the screwdriver, the tri-wing, and you pull the thing apart and you put it in a new shell, and you've just done something. And
Yeah.
then you're like, oh, geez, what about, I should have got some buttons. And you might think this through and replace the buttons. And the next thing, and look, if you're willing to buy a shell that's going to do it, you can buy, like, let's say, a funny playing shell and a funny playing screen, and you're good to go. And you've just turned that childhood nostalgic piece of tech into something that you can play today and not have to strain or hold it at the right light. So the journey to where you're at isn't as unachievable as some people might think.
Yeah, exactly. I don't like when people say like, "Oh, so smart" or whatever, because what I'm doing, anyone can do. Like, I encourage people to, I'll help out where I can, but yeah, I encourage everyone to pick up a soldering iron
Yeah.
and solder.
Yeah.
Just make sure you don't burn yourself like I'd have a million times.
Yeah. Oh, you got to burn yourself to realize where you're supposed to put it back down each time. That's how you learn.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, Game Boys aren't that cheap. So it is hard to kind of just, bash around. But there's other options out there. Like in Australia, we've got a J car, the chain,
Hmm.
and they do a lot of kits and stuff. And someone's the matter of just buying a bit of like sort of PCB breadboard and a bag of resistors and just doing clean solders. And you do that while you're listening to a podcast, maybe. And before you know it, you can solder, and that's it. And the rest of it is, then you just progress. Things like some of the screens, the funny playing screen, being able to change the brightness. That's a really good first soldering mod, because you've only got to kind of tin up the points and then join the wires. And it's done. It's not intimidating at all. Putting it all back together without jamming the wires in between things is another challenge. But yeah, so
And fixing things is such a thing that, I mean, it's become harder down the line because of how electronic everything has gotten. But if you think back like 20, well, more than 20 years ago, like when if someone's car broke down,
mm-hmm.
a lot of people would just open it up and fix up whatever
Yeah,
themselves. And
yeah,
um, I kind of, that's my goal as well, and I kind of encourage that as well, because that's another thing to keep things affordable, being able to fix things yourself.
correct.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Don't be afraid to maybe pick up that Game Boy that's 40, $50 and the person's like doesn't turn on. And it could be as simple as the power switch just needs a bit of love, or the batteries are flat, that sort of thing. And they're
Or
the
you
sort of,
just need to, for example, change out the speaker. That's just 2 solder joints there.
exactly. Cool. All right, lots of thought, lots of food for thought there, and lots of inspiration. All right, Nat, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me this evening. And we'll stay in touch. And anybody that needs to get hold of Nat, just there'll be a bunch of links to people and Nat's blog and so on in my show notes once it goes up. I'll just give another little reminder of my primary affiliate, Craig from retrogamestore.com.au. And if you're in Australia, New Zealand, and Nat, we'll chat again, hopefully. Hey,
Yeah, thanks for having me on and letting me ramble about electronics.
mate, you are welcome to ramble anytime. Thank you for coming in. Okay,
Thank you.
ta-da.
Bye. Yeah, thanks for having me on and letting me ramble about electronics.
Mate, you are welcome to ramble anytime. Thank you for coming in. Okay,
Thank you.
ta-da.
Bye.